So this video is going to go over solving equations involving fractions. So at this point, we should be comfortable with dumpsters contain very nasty stuff. So these steps right here, these 5 steps when it comes to solving equations. So whenever we have an expression equal to an expression, solving for x or solving for a variable, these are the steps we use. So now we're going to be presented with equations that have fractions in them. And we're going to have to get rid of those. So in order to get rid of those, there's basically a step gets added on. So there's a 6th step that gets added on that you have to do before. So basically what it does is that it creates more parentheses because we're going to be multiplying the lowest common multiple or the lowest common denominator by both sides of the equation. So it gets multiplied by both sides of the expression. All right, so here it tells us to eliminate the fractions in your equation, you can multiply everything by the lowest common denominator. Okay, so what that looks like is this. So here are the steps. I added this here. So if fractions are present, you find the lowest common denominator, and there's 2 steps up here that you're going to follow. So coming down here to example 1, I'm going to actually first, okay, let's read step number 1. So we have find lowest common multiple of all denominators. So lowest common multiple is the same thing as lowest common denominator, except that you're just looking at the denominator. So I'm going to skip to example 2, or no, we'll just do number 1. I'll start with number 1. So looking at example 1, we notice that there's only one fraction. Great, that makes it easier for us. So we're going to look at the denominator, and we're going to take that denominator and multiply it by both sides and all terms. So it says to multiply that lowest common multiple. In this case, there's only one fraction, so one denominator, so that happens to be a 3. So that means we're going to take that 3 and multiply it by each term on both sides of the equation. So what that looks like is this. So we have a 3, so that means I'm going to create parentheses on both sides in all expressions. So this is an expression, this is an expression, and I'm going to multiply this 3 by both of these terms and by this one term over here. So now we can do the math. So whenever you have one denominator and you multiply it by the denominator, this essentially cancels out for the first term and you get just 1x. So that would be x. But the way we actually do it, in case it's going to be different numbers, you would do it as 3 goes into 3 how many times? 1 time. So taking that 1, so you divide it by itself, so 3 divided by 3 is equal to 1. And then you're going to multiply that 1 by whatever the denominator, or excuse me, whatever the numerator is. So 1 times 1 is 1, which is what we already have. So that's 1x, but we just expressed it as x. The reason why I wanted to explain that is because when we get to two different denominators, it'll make it much more easier for us. But if there is only one denominator or all the denominators are the same, like this one, essentially you're multiplying both sides by whatever that denominator is. So that'll make it easier for when the denominators are all the same. All right, so x. So now this 3, so we multiply 3 by this term. So now we're going to multiply 3 by this term, which we get 3 times positive 5, which is 15, is equal to 9 times 3, which is 27. So now we will just do the math from there. And then, so from there, we would just follow the rules. So we got rid of we distributed, got rid of the parentheses. We created parentheses by doing lowest common denominator. We distributed those. We don't have any combined like terms. Variables already on one side of the equal sign. So now we can skip all the way down to numbers. Get rid of the numbers. Or get rid of one of the terms that are numbers by themselves. And then x, bring down the x is equal to 12. So you should get x is equal to 12. So let's take a look at this example number 2. So we have two denominators this time. They're both the same. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by the lowest common denominator. Lowest common denominator in this case is, well, 5, since they're both 5s. So that means this whole side gets multiplied by 5, and this whole side gets multiplied by 5. All right, for over here, so like what I explained over here, that cancels out, and you're left with just 1. Or if you wanted to, you can type on a calculator 5 times 1 divided by 5, and you'll still get the same answer, 1. All right, over here, same thing, that would cancel out. We're just left with x, or 5 will go into 5, or 5 divided by 5 is 1. So taking that 1 and then multiplying it by that numerator, you get x. And then 5, okay, so that's the first term. So now 5 times negative 6, excuse me, which is negative 30. So now we're left with 1 equals x minus 30. And then we just solve from there like we normally do. So let's get rid of this 30. That cancels out, and we're left with 31 is equal to x, or x equals 31. All right, so here's where it could get a little more tricky. So we have x equals 5/6 minus 1/2 x. All right, so remember your rule, or your rules, or your steps for getting rid of fractions. Find the LCM, lowest common multiple, and then we're going to multiply that by both sides of the equation. So now we have a 6 and a 2. So if you're unfamiliar with looking for or finding the lowest common multiple, what you're going to do is we are going to list all those numbers out. So lowest common denominator, we're just looking at the denominators. So we have a 6 and we have a 2. And then we're going to count in multiples of that number. So, and I'm going to write them down. So 6, we have 6, 12, 18, 24, and so forth. 2, we have 2, 4, 6, 8, and so forth. So now we're going to, the lowest common multiple, or the lowest common denominator, is the number that both of them have in common. So I'm going to start down here. So 2, well, is 2 a is 2 shared up here as a lowest common multiple? No, it's not. 4, nope. So it can't be anything lower than 6, basically. But 6 goes into itself 1 time, and 2 goes into itself 3 times. So this number would be considered the lowest common multiple. So that number is what we're going to use to multiply on both sides of the expression. Or excuse me, both sides of the equation. So 6, I'm going to create my 6, parentheses around the entire expression, and then a 6 around this entire expression, which happens to be just an x. So we're going to multiply that lowest common denominator by both sides. All right, so now I'm going to rewrite it down here. So now we got 6 times 1x, which is just 6x, is equal to, all right, so here we go. So we have a minus sign right here. So that means this is a term, 5/6 is a term, and 1/2 x is a term. So that means we're going to multiply this 6 by that term and by this term. All right, so 6 goes into 6 1 time. So taking that 1, multiplying it by the numerator, it comes out to 5. So I'm going to write down 5 right here. All right, so we took care of that term. So now we have 6 times negative 1/2. So 2 goes into 6 3 times. And 3 times the numerator, which is 1, is 3x. And it's a negative, so I'm going to say minus 3x. And that would be our new expression, and then you would just solve from there. Same thing over here. So we have 4, 2, and 6. So I'm just going to write out their multiples, counting multiples of 4. So 4, 8, 12, 16, and so on. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and so on, 6, 12, 18, 24, and so on. So now we got to find the one that they all share. I'm going to start with the smallest one. So 2, 4. Well, 4 won't work because 4 is not down here where the 6 is. That we got 2 6s right here, but 4 doesn't share 6. 6. So basically we need to find 12. So 2 does go into 12, so I'd have to keep going. So the number is basically 12. So we're going to have to multiply both sides of the equation by 12. So look at something like this. 4 goes into 12 3 times. 3 times 1p is just 3p. Is equal to 2 goes into 12 6 times, and 6 times 1, the numerator, is just 6. Plus 6 goes into 12 2. 2 times 1p is 2p. And then you would just solve it like you normally would. So that's how you get rid of fractions in a equation.